My next guest has claimed that if the welfare state were a pensions or insurance company like Aviva or the Prudential, the regulators would already be closing it down. Government financial forecasts do not take account of what are known as unfunded liabilities, things like the public sector pension bill, which is estimated to be worth roughly 220% of GDP. How do we plan to pay for this? The answer appears to be that no one really knows. But my next guest, John Penrose, the former Conservative MP and, dare I say, a Somerset MP, so clearly extremely civilised, has done more work than most on this problem and has some ideas to solve this looming debt crisis. John, first of all, thank you for coming in. What I'd like you to do to begin with is explain the problem, because this isn't party political. This is a problem of the state finances.
Absolutely right. And what the Labour Party has done is they've produced this new balance sheet, which is designed to show that actually they've got a bit more borrowing room, because Rachel Reeves wanted to find some excuse to allow her to borrow more money. But what actually it's done is they've left off all these really big and important liabilities, these effective long-term debts, the sorts of things you were just describing. And if you leave things out of your balance sheet, guess what? You can paint any picture you like if you're not being honest.
But we did the same. So the Tories are just as culpable in terms of not telling people what these liabilities were. But if you could run through them, what are they? And why don't people know about them?
So what are they? They are, you mentioned the public sector pensions, so lots and lots of public sector workers. Some have funded pensions. Those are like the ones that Prudential or many of your viewers may have with their company pensions. But some are unfunded, so they're paid for by you and me out of current tax revenues.
And those are the big ones. Those are the National Health, the police, the fire brigade, the civil service.
Things like that.
Yeah.
But even bigger than all of that is the state pension. That's completely unfunded. That's paid for today out of your and my taxes.
Many people think that national insurance goes into a pot and they then retire with money coming out of that pot. That's not true.
No, exactly right. And the problem with it is that if you have something where today's taxpayers pay for today's pensioners' pensions, if you have a demographic time bomb, if you have an ageing society like we and many other countries have, that means you've got more and more pensioners claiming on fewer and fewer working-age people, and that's an unsustainable proposition. So it doesn't work. It means that we actually have a fundamentally bust system. The welfare state as we know it is not financially sustainable, and we've got to do something about it.
And you've done some of the calculations on this, and they're done on the basis of a private sector pension fund, aren't they? So this is something that's fairly well known, that this isn't novel economic concepts you're coming up with.
Not at all, no. And this is something which you mentioned, the Aviva or the Prudential. They value the cost of the liabilities that they're promising to pay everyone's pensions on. Fairly standard methodology. If you apply that to things like the state pension, it's 220-something% of GDP. That blows a complete hole in Rachel Reeves' numbers, and dare I say it, every other chancellor's too.
And these are state liabilities, just like gilt-edged securities, aren't they? They are the same value because the government has promised to pay them. You can't take pensions away. You may be able to delay the retirement age, but the WASPy women weren't very keen on that. But what you're not going to be able to do is simply say, we are not paying a state pension.
So I mean, there's a technical difference between a public sector pension, which is contractual, and a benefit or a politician's promise, which is what the state pension is. But nonetheless, if you try to not pay it, I mean, all hell will break loose.
You'd have riots.
Yeah, you'd have riots. So I think we can say that in practice they are the same thing.
Stage one is that you've identified the problem. Stage two is valuing it, the scale of it. What is stage three? How do we deal with this? Because these sums are so enormous.
Enormous, yeah. Well, I think the answer is that having it's like everyone's saying that when they first discover they've got a problem with alcohol, the first thing to do is to admit it to yourself. And I think we just got to face up to the fact as a society that over it's taken 50 years for the welfare state to get to this stage. It'll probably take at least 50 years to get out of it, but start we must.
And how do you get out of it? Do you begin to fund future state pensions, or do you begin to put money aside? I know that employers now make a contribution into private funds for their employees. Do you try to shift to that?
So I think to begin with, you need to give the government of the day a legal duty to just improve it by even just a tiny bit each year, because it's, saving for a pension is a long-term thing. You start doing it little and often, and they can either do it by trying to realise some of the other assets, which the government owns huge numbers of assets elsewhere. You can put some of those against the pensions and try to create a funded pension. Other thing which I've been suggesting as well is other countries have a sovereign wealth fund. Now, if we had a sovereign wealth fund, you'd have to start now, and it would take years. But if you had a sovereign wealth fund, you can start to build a funded pot. But again, it's a project of generations.
But there are ways of doing this. I used to invest money for the Canadian State Pension Fund, the PIP, which issued bonds to the value of the liability, which could be sold gradually, so they didn't flood the market. And this moved to a funded pension. Singapore has a phenomenal wealth fund.
Yeah.
And I thought we could use our overseas aid budget as investment rather than expenditure, and then you build up a wealth fund, admittedly over 50 years, because it's all very, very long term. But it's how do you build up these pots of money?
There are lots of possible solutions to it, but the important thing is to take a long-term view and to plant some acorns so that a forest of mighty oak trees will in due course grow. And you've got to find the money, start small, but keep going.
And how long have people known about this problem?
Well, I've been banging on about it for ages, but I think it's one of those things that people... It's rather like someone who knows they've got a problem with debt. They know it's there, and then they try and avoid talking about it, and they kid themselves. And I'm afraid that's what we've been doing as a nation.
And we've got to talk about it. John, thank you very much for joining me this evening.